Well, good afternoon from Hong Kong. I'm not sure where you are in the world. It's great to be here. I'm Matthew. As that introduction says, I teach business and economics at Anglia International School, Hong Kong. I also have a strong interest in positive psychology. I've read literally hundreds of books now, including a book to help me research getting this webinar together. So the way we're going to do this, next slide, Sam, is we're going to kind of break it into two halves. I'll take care of the first half, which we're going to be focusing on neuroplasticity. What is it? What is some of the research about neuroplasticity, which backs up the definition of it? So hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what that means. And then I'll be talking about some studies which have been done, some really interesting studies actually, which I've done some research into as well. I'll be talking about how neuroplasticity has affected me in my own personal life and in my teaching career as well. And there will be a short activity for people to share their ideas if they're willing to do so. And then around 20 to 25 minutes, I'll be shifting over and then letting Sam take over and talking to you about limitless learning. So as we can see, there's two aims. So just go back a second, Sam. We want to really get you to grasp what neuroplasticity is and how you can use it to become a better teacher. And Sam will be talking to you about limitless learning and the impact it can have in your teaching careers. Next slide, please. Now, if you were to Google, what is neuroplasticity, you'll get numerous definitions for it. And amazingly, it's not in all dictionaries. And my thinking behind that is it's a fairly new term. Neuroplasticity is a fairly recent breakthrough in neuroscience. This is recent research that has been found out in the last 20 years. And what it's really about, if you break the word down into neuro and plasticity, neuro is kind of referring to your mind, your brain, and plasticity actually comes from a Greek word, which I can't remember what it was, but it means to mold. And what research has discovered is that our brains literally grow and change every single day of our lives, from the moment we're born to the moment we pass away. And that really goes against thinking and beliefs in the past, where the predominant idea was that our brains were fixed. We were born with either an intelligent brain or not an intelligent brain, and how we educated people kind of depended on that belief. But that's all been thrown out now because research has proven that our brains can change. And that's fantastic as learners, as educators, because we can use this to become more effective teachers and give everyone around us a better education. So I'm not going to say what neuroplasticity by reading that out. That's just my background reading into this. Next slide, please. So what I think would be really useful is to watch a very short 3-minute video on this, which explains what neuroplasticity is. We let the video play.
Neuroscience is a biological science that is concerned with the function of the brain and the nervous system. For many years, scientists thought that the brain was fixed and couldn't adapt or change after childhood. But advances in fMRI scanning have shown that this could not be further from the truth. We can now see that our brains change and adapt every day, regardless of our age. Every time we learn something new, we're harnessing the power of neuroplasticity. Neuroscientists believe we have over 100 billion neurons in our brain, each capable of connecting to tens of thousands of others. Neurons are the building blocks of the brain, and each one can make trillions of connections every second. When we learn a new skill or think about something differently, we begin to make new connections between neurons. Every time we practice a new skill, think in a certain way, or feel a specific emotion, those related connections are then strengthened, and it becomes easier for our brains to follow this pathway. If we keep using this pathway, our brains begin to adapt, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The less we use our old pathways, the weaker that pathway becomes. It's this ability to make new connections that has enabled scientists to coin the term neuroplasticity, meaning our brains are pliable and plastic and can grow, adapt, and change. When we apply the neuroscience of learning with how the brain works, we can modify 4 variables to maximize the retainment of knowledge. These can be summarized as AGEs: attention, generation, emotion, and spacing. Attention. For us to be able to learn something, we need to pay attention to it. If we can't minimize distractions, then we can't focus on the learning and we won't remember it. Generation. This is where we encourage the learner to generate meaningful connections and associations with what they already know or a skill they already have. Help the learner to make those connections to previous learning and the wider context, and this includes the learner reflecting on their own learning process. Emotion. If we can attach emotion to the learning and help to motivate the learner with the rewards that they're going to gain from it, or challenge them to get out of their comfort zone, they're much more likely to remember the information later on. Spacing. Spacing out the learning over time and using repetition and retrieval instead of chunking it into one big block will strengthen the learning and help to move it from short-term memory to long-term memory. With the trend for more courses moving towards endpoint assessment, this skill will be key in the achievement and success of our learners.
Yeah, so this little image, this diagram is a nice little way to kind of see what neuroplasticity is and how it can change and grow our minds, our brains, so that we can do more. So I like the picture at the top. You know, it's almost like the brain is like a gym. If you don't go to the gym, your muscles get weak, right? But if you go to the gym and you keep it up, then your muscles get stronger. But this is the important thing about neuroplasticity. It does mean our brains can grow if we want to and we put the effort in to learn something. But if we stop putting that effort in, our brains can actually unlearn or shrink in some regards. So I like that image of the gym, because people can relate to that. So we can literally build and train our minds. And that picture underneath is like what they're neurons. We have all these neurons in our mind, and then when we learn something, we either strengthen existing neural pathways or we create new ones. And the more we repeat and deepen our learning, these pathways get stronger, and that's literally changing our minds every single day. Structural change means we can actually grow different parts of our brain depending on how we use that. And there's a study later about London taxi drivers, about how they grew a particular part of their brain because it was related to the work that they did. And functional change means we can change the function of our minds depending on what we want to do with it. So the takeaway from neuroplasticity is that the fixed brain thinking is gone. It's history. It doesn't exist anymore. Research has proven through science that we can literally change our minds. And this is fantastic as teachers, because now when I see a room of learners in my classroom, I know that each one of them has the capacity to grow and develop and learn and be the best that they can be. I no longer judge people and categorize them as either weak, low, or mid or high ability. And I think that's very, very revolutionary for me personally. Next slide, please. So this was a very recent research, neuroscience research into London taxi drivers. Now, they picked London taxi drivers because if you want to become a black cab taxi driver in London, you have to pass a very difficult exam called the knowledge. And the knowledge takes on average 4 years to complete. It's almost like doing a full-time degree. And you can't, if you don't pass this test, you can't have the license to become a London taxi driver. So they have to memorize all like 25,000 different streets, all these tourist locations, places of interest, hotels, restaurants. It's an unbelievable amount of information. And London is not like a simple city, which is like designed and organized in like grids, like first or second or third street. It's all really complicated. And so in order to pass this test, you have to really, really put the effort in. And what they did to research what effect this had on the people training to be London taxi drivers, the effect this had on their minds, they noticed that those going through the process of passing this really tough exam, they actually changed their minds. They measured this. There's a part of the mind which kind of measures spatial memory, which is your ability to recall and see information in your mind, so to speak. Yeah, that part of the people trained to do this exam, that part of their brains actually grew. And when they stopped becoming London taxi drivers, it began to shrink. So literally their brains changed, they either grew or shrunk depending on whether they were learning or retiring from being a London taxi driver. So I thought that was really fascinating research, and it's fairly recent as well. Next slide, please. So how have I kind of seen this in my own teaching? I remember a couple of years ago, this is how I've changed as being a teacher. Like I was trained in the UK, and the system in the UK is very much, you put students into different streams. And I'm a business and economics teacher. So often I'm given mixed ability students in my class. So I have students who are like not labeled, but they're kind of seen as lower ability. And I have students who are kind of labeled as gifted and talented. And we have kind of most students in the middle. And I remember a couple of years ago, I had a class of business studies students, very much mixed ability. I had about 12 in the class. I had a few which really needed extra support. You could class them as lower ability coming in. And I had a few students who were very, very capable. One of them actually went on to study at Oxford University. And I remember, like, my thinking at the start of that school year was, I can see what grade they're going to get. The students who are going to struggle, they're probably only going to get a C or a D grade. And the students who are really strong, they're going to get an A star. And the ones in the middle might get an A, a B, a C, depends on how much work they put in. But it was almost like I decided to kind of change my teaching, and I didn't know this research before I did this. And I gave them the same teaching throughout. The ones which needed extra help, I give them some extra help after school, but I did the same strategies, the same teaching, and the same kind of assessment for learning skills, which I built into my teaching during that school year. The end result was that every single person in that class got the best grade possible, which was a grade A. And I remember when the results came up, I was flabbergasted. Not so much because everyone got an A, but because the students who were labeled weaker ability kind of by the system, they all managed to get the highest grade. They were all capable of getting it. Yes, they needed a bit more help and support, but they were able to get it. And that showed me that everybody has the capability to reach the maximum, so to speak. So for me, that was kind of neuroplasticity in essence. The fact that don't judge people, don't label people, and give everyone the chance to learn, and then they can do it. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of give you an opportunity to contribute and participate. And there's a lot of activity there for you to kind of think about and reflect. And you could, if you can, like, have a little think about this amongst yourselves, and you can perhaps raise your hand in the chat, and me and Sam can invite you in to share. The first question: have you ever learned or achieved something that you initially thought was difficult to do? What happened, and what do you notice about this experience? So just to give you like an example, I really struggled with learning to be a teacher. It wasn't until it was in my 8th year that I got to where I wanted to be, which was getting outstanding teacher observations. I was plateaued on a good level. This is kind of the UK Ofsted government's inspection level of quality of teaching. I was plateaued on a good level for a number of years. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't quite get the outstanding rating. And I was stuck and I was frustrated. Nevertheless, I got there in the end, despite numerous challenges and feedback from particular teachers that I didn't have the potential to get there, but I stuck at it and I got there in the end and I achieved my objective. But the fact is, I found teaching, I picked up the basic skill quite quickly. I could teach lessons, but I wanted to be a really good teacher. That took me 8 years. So that repetitive, deliberate practice, I eventually got there. So for me, that's neuroplasticity in my own experience. So why don't you have a little reflection on that? And then if you would like to contribute by sharing some of your own experiences, we'll like to hear them.
I've got a similar story, actually, Matthew, and Wendy will attest to this. Wendy was my mentor when I first started teaching. She's in this webinar here. And she will attest to the fact that I found it really tough to start with. And it took me a very long time in that first year, and a lot of anxiety and stress to sort of overcome those challenges. And that's definitely something I've learned from my teaching experiences. There is that sort of capacity to develop and learn it, and throughout our entire careers. I think that's a really important point there.
I think if I can briefly share my experience, I was the bottom set in mathematics at school, and I think I definitely was on the receiving end of the damage that labeling can sometimes do. And I've always avoided anything to do with maths, to be honest, or kind of anything connected in any way throughout my career. I found myself in a position where I had to start reporting financially to members of the charity I work for, Chatteris, and I was going into this boardroom and having to talk to these ex-finance banker types about something that was completely out of my depth. It was kind of anxiety-inducing, and it wasn't really until one of the trustees kind of recognized that I was kind of really concerned about this, and as you kind of suggested, took it in chunks, met me every week, really kind of prepared me for those meetings. And I think for me, it definitely was a demonstration of kind of that approach to realizing that even at 36 and having this abject fear of anything based around numbers, like you can actually, with time, kind of approach those challenges.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think, yeah, that's what I've seen in teaching. And I've completely changed my perspective on teaching now. Even today, I was having a conversation with a colleague and they were talking about putting students into lower and higher ability sets. Now I'm like, no, put students in mixed ability sets and give them the same teaching because they all have the capacity to reach the top levels. So maybe I'll just summarize, Sam, and then I'll let you do your...
One more hand up there. So I think just Wendy, you've got your hand up there.
Hi, yes, I was just thinking about, you know, that kind of labeling thing that you were talking about. When I was young, started high school, and I was very, very shy, and I was put into the Shies Club. I mean, you couldn't get any worse labeling than that. And I think at that point, it was just either, it either makes or breaks you. And I think if you have a lesser resolve, I think you could kind of become even more shy and become even more reserved because of the labeling. But for me, I think I was fortunate because I always wanted to be a teacher. And I knew that if I couldn't overcome my shyness, I would never be able to stand in front of a class and teach. And so I think in a way, it did make me stronger. It made me realize that I needed to do something different and change the way kind of my own feelings. But I think I'm very conscious nowadays not to label anybody either in a positive or a negative light, because I think both ways kind of detrimental, because if you label somebody poor at something, then they kind of give up and they go, well, I'm poor at it anyway, so it doesn't matter. But if conversely, if you label somebody very, very good at it, at something, then if they fail to reach that expectations, then they feel bad about themselves as well. So I think it's very important that we kind of move away from all this labeling aspect and give children that freedom to just explore and be who they are. Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy. Declan, you had your hand up briefly there. Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
I was going to talk about probably the hardest thing I've ever done was something that I previously thought I wasn't good at. So I remember being at school doing my GCSE French, and I was just terrible at it. I think I got a D with a lot of extra help. And so I moved to Vietnam and I decided to try and learn Vietnamese. And it was so daunting at the beginning, but yeah, I persevered and I started to really enjoy it because of the doors that were opened for me as a result of learning the language. And yeah, decided that I did enjoy learning languages, which was something that I didn't realize before.
Keep.
All right, so let's wrap up neuroplasticity. I think the takeaway for me is just the fact that our brains can adapt and change and grow and also shrink depending on whatever we're up to and what we want to learn. So thank you for listening. And Sam, do you want to now take over?
Brilliant, thank you, Matthew. Really insightful stuff. And Kat Leppick has just put in the chat function as well about learning to drive and anxieties around that and showing grit and determination. And that's brilliant as well. Some really nice stories. Thank you for sharing. Great. So my kind of background originally through Limitless Learning comes originally through my teacher's training and Carol Dweck, and this is my first exposure. And for those who are educators here and know Carol will know Carol Dweck and the idea of correlation between success and mindset. And Carol Dweck outlines sort of fixed mindsets as opposed to growth mindsets and obstacles that are in our way when we're changing our mind and challenging our mindset on things. And what Carol Dweck outlines is an understanding of conceptualizing and changing the way we're able to do things. And the 5 main strands she mentions are ways in which we look at challenge and obstacle, our effort around outcome as opposed to the pathway, which is an ideal sort of growth mindset, and comparing the successes of others to yourselves and the negative impact that can have. And in terms of how we impose our views and our ability to grow on our children, it all comes from the teaching side. And much of my classroom practice is developed around open-ended tasks, looking at language and environment around effort and over aptitude. And that's what has driven my kind of classroom practice to date. To be honest, when I first came across Carol Dweck, I was quite skeptical. And actually, it was only really when embracing growth mindset that I really felt like I was sort of getting anywhere as a teacher and developing as a teacher. And I'm going to mention in a minute the term unlocked. And actually, this moment where I embraced growth mindset in my classroom really made me become unlocked as an educator. And then from Carol Dweck led me to Joe Bowler and Limitless Mind. And she's recently brought out a book on limitless learning. And I couldn't recommend this book more. It's absolutely brilliant in terms of how we look at what we do in our classroom practice. And her major overall kind of the overview of it is how we're always learning, and we have an ability to learn forever throughout our lives, and there should be no capacity to our ability to learn. And she identifies 6 keys as ways in which we can not only unlock our children as learners, but also our ability to become unlocked ourselves. And she references leadership in the business world as well, and unlocking yourself as a leader in the classroom and also in industry. And these are the 6 keys. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go through all of them today, but if you do pick up this book, there's a much more depth to her 6 keys. But it all revolves around brain growth, struggle, and that kind of mindset in which we approach challenge. So what we do know about brain growth is she references Norman Doidge, who suggests that our brains are constantly growing and changing. And as Matthew alluded to earlier, that every day we wake up and our brain is slightly different. And there have been multiple studies on adults of all ages that show that after 8 weeks of significant activity on a task, we produce huge brain growth and change. And that references the neuroplasticity approach that Matthew mentioned earlier. And actually, Joe Bowler suggests school students have limitless capacity for brain change and growth. I think as we get older, we have certain obstacles that come in our way in terms of outside life that takes over as challenge and a brain aging. But she outlines that students in school have a limitless capacity for change and growth. And she uses some examples, particularly around school maths levels, but we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a second. So I'd like to give you a case study that she references to start with, and this is a student called Nicholas Lexford, and he's an Australian boy, in his first year at school. His parents were told by his teachers that he was, quote, learning disabled and the worst learner they'd come across in 20 years. And he had a very low IQ. And in 2018, he graduated with a doctorate in applied mathematics from Oxford University. And since then, his mother's written a memoir about him. And there's some really interesting stuff you can Google and find out. He does some amazing interviews around this. And from being a very young learner, where he was identified as being low attainer, and clearly learning disabled is not a very glowing term for anyone, particularly a child. He went on to achieve limitless learning in maths, and he graduated, as I said, 2018. So a case in point that we can learn anything. So I think there's a lot of research around mindset and evidence, and people can be quite scathing initially about it. And there was a study around British in local state British schools that came out last year, which sort of was quite damning on growth mindset. But I think I'd like to counter that by saying that there's more evidence over decades to conclude that actually we do have the ability to continue to learn. And there has been evidence over various age groups, from adults to children to very wide sort of spec. And there's also suggestion that having a growth mindset can help improve health and also reduce aggression. So I'd like to give an example of how growth mindset is real. And this is the research by Alia Crum and Langer, which took place over a 21-year period on over 60,000 people. And what they did, they split a group into more or less kind of positive thinkers and negative thinkers. And they gave the negative thinkers the understanding that they thought they were doing less exercise than the positive thinking group, whereas actually they were doing exactly the same amount of exercise. And over that 21-year period, those who had the negative thoughts about their exercise, the negative mindsets, were 71% more likely to die in the follow-up period after this 21-year period had been concluded. So that tells you quite a lot about our way in which we think and the way in which we think about ourselves as well. And there was another study that went on to do with a group of hotel cleaning staff in the States. And they were split into two groups. One group were told that their work, so their day-to-day work as a hotel cleaning member of the cleaning team, met the US Surgeon General's recommendations for a healthy lifestyle. And they studied them for over a four-week period. And one of the groups, those with a positive mind, actually had a decrease in blood pressure and BMI and weight and body fat over that period, as opposed to the other group who were not told this recommendation from the about the healthy lifestyle. So it's quite telling really, I think. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. Kate, if you wouldn't mind managing the chat, see if there are any questions, just please feel free to interlude at any point.
No problem.
Thank you. And there's also research on mindset and aggression as well. And this comes from Dweck and Jaeger, where people with fixed mindsets are more likely to be aggressive, as they believe that people, including themselves, cannot change, and that any failure they've experienced in themselves is indication of weakness. And they have a greater tendency to feel more shame and hatred towards themselves. Whereas with mindset interventions, there's been some evidence to conclude that there's less conflict, decrease in shame, and decrease in aggression. So this was another bit of research from Lee et al. And 68% of students, so when students in this American study, when students left from lower school, so went up to their high school or secondary school, 68% of students over a period of time experienced a drop in grades in their first year, in their first term. And those with growth mindset students saw this as temporary and had reduced stress levels, and therefore their grades bounced back. Whereas those with fixed mindset result in high stress levels and their grades plateauing. So a kind of another telling approach to mindset. I think with all this, really what I'm trying to allude to is the evidence suggests that growth mindset and you having an approach to yourself in a open and developmental way is really the first point. If you're an educator or in any line of work, it's about developing yourself firstly, and letting go of your ideas as being limited, letting go of personal ideas of having limited in the ceiling to your ambitions and the ceiling to your achievement levels, and accepting self-doubt as being part of that. I think that's a really key part of becoming unlocked. I've used that term before, but becoming unlocked and being able to really embrace challenge and being aware that it's okay to doubt yourself. That's part of our existence as humans, and across all walks of life, people have self-doubt in everything we do. And with that, having an understanding that there is no limit on your performance. You might encounter stumbling blocks along the way, but actually that's just an obstacle that needs to be jumped over. And I think as soon as we see that as educators, we're much more willing to replicate that and show that across our learners and our children in our classroom as well. So how to do it then? I think having that understanding internally firstly, but also when we're looking at working examples in a classroom, it really comes down to language and having that limitless language around our approach. So using growth language instead of fixed language, and how that looks is praise around effort, praise around resilience, praise around choices of challenge, rather than well done, you've got it all right, which is what's kind of referred to as smart praise. And also understanding that we can't be either fixed mindset or growth mindset people. We all have times where we have fixed minds. We all have times where we're a bit more open to growth. And it's important to understand those times and understand when we're a bit more fixed and be okay with it. And I think that's an opportunity to have those conversations with children as well. But it's a matter of identifying what those triggers are when you are fixed. So there's reference to sort of group meetings and heads of companies who have a bit of a fixed mindset, and when it comes to autocratic decisions and actually embracing that and being okay with those, but then understanding that at times those are important, but actually in the bigger picture, we need to be quite growth in our approach. And I mentioned there praise growth and the power of yet. So there's a huge amount of talk around the use of yet in a classroom. So children, I can't do it, and then correcting that with I can't do it yet, and having that chance to remove the ceiling, and not letting children give up on things, and empowering them with belief messages to carry on. And this one was a bit for parents. Something that I picked up from the book was about social comparisons, particularly in relation to siblings and comparing to siblings. And I know when I was growing up, I was lucky to be in a household where I wasn't compared to my sibling, who I was perceived as being intelligent, and I was always sort of the sporty one, but there was never any comparison. But I think there was a lot of talk around. There's been a lot of talk around those social comparisons and how damaging they can be, and therefore being okay to let go with those comparisons as well. Which, as a parent, I'm not a parent myself, so I won't be able to relate to that. Maybe some parents in here would be able to maybe add any comments at this point on any social comparisons that they have experienced between children, and anything that's been positive or anything that they have found as a particular barrier. Another example of Karen Gautier and a mindset shift, and she gave an example of when she was a child, she was allowed to give up on things, and then she replicated that onto her children. And it was only when she became unlocked that she realized that the language around struggle was really important. And she found out through neuroscience and education and her educational research that struggle and making mistakes was really important. She'd been perhaps sending a wrong message to her her children around struggle previously. So she gives this great story about her son, and he was just finishing his little league baseball game. He'd gone through the whole season. He was about to graduate up to the senior team, and they were in the car to a game, and he said, "Mum, that's it. I'm never going to hit a home run." And she turned to him and said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, I've got this far, never hit a home run so far. Why today?" And she said, "This is your last game." And she said the term "I am." And she said, "When you get out on that plate, keep saying, I am, I am, I am, I am." And he went out there and he repeated the term "I am, I am, I am." And he changed his mindset. And in his last ever hit, he hit this home run, and he sprinted around and finished off with and embracing his mum's arms. And his mum talked about this as being an amazing moment in terms of her shift in language in what she was presenting onto her children, but also the ability for her son to see the challenges he's had up to that point as important for him to be able to have the confidence in which he could hit that home run. And I thought it was an amazing story. So I guess when it comes to becoming unlocked, when it comes to our understanding of what it means to be limitless, it's about how we interact with others. And it's about how we open minds of adults and children, colleagues, and the people we work with to allow them into a position where they have the skills to become and embrace growth and limitless learning. And I'm really going to focus on this kind of last one here on the embracing in uncertainty point as one that's really key in getting a message across. So there's this term, "you're not an island." So if you see yourself alone as an island, you don't have the outside influence of other people to help you change. So with your approach to growth and approach to being unlimited, it's about discovery and bringing people around and bringing people together to work out problems and share uncertainty and changing the language of being unsure and open to discovery. And no matter where we are in our professional careers, but also in our social lives, it's being open enough to say, "I don't know, and why don't we work it out together?" And I think really, if you're looking at culture and also growth, if you as a team or you in a classroom, you don't know the answer to a child's question, be willing to be open about that and embrace that uncertainty, embrace the struggle and say, "All right, we're going to find it out together." Or if you're in an office environment or in a different working environment, being open to the idea of being willing to be unsure and being open to being vulnerable. I think that's a really important part to be able to influence others in changing your mind, changing for the better. So you're not an island, you're a continent, I guess. And with that, not only are you embracing growth, but you're also embracing difference in people and understanding that we are at times fixed, we are at times more growth focused, and there are people who are different to that. And there are people who are coming from all different backgrounds and all different starting points. And it's actually really appreciating the difference as well. So it's important of accepting, but also appreciating and seeing that from people's viewpoints and seeing the way they see the world really is a way of becoming limitless and opening our minds. And I think the main takeaway from this in becoming an ultimate limitless approach in ourselves and then furthermore with our children in classrooms is being open to becoming unlocked in everyday life, seeing the opportunities of failure as learning experiences and really embracing that uncertainty in times and being collaborative in how you can become unlocked and think about struggle and opportunities in everything we do as growth opportunities. And that way, the influence you can have on others and influence you can have in your classroom for growth is huge, really. So that's it from my side, I guess. Matt, is there anything you'd like to add to that, please? I think you're muted, Matthew.
Not really. No, I think that the term limitless learning sums it all up. And that's all I'm going to say. If anyone's got any questions, we're welcome to hear from you. Have you got anything else, any experiences or anything you'd like to add to what we've talked about today?
Yeah, please. This is a bit of a free forum. So a few comments in their chat, I think. Yeah, limitless learning. I'd love to take claim to that, Tom. Unfortunately, it's Joe Bowler's, nothing to do with me. I've just stolen it. But it's important. Its language is really important in the classroom. And also, I think, in teams and as well. So
we've got a few questions here, Sam. There's one question here from Tom. Tom says, how do you encourage parents to understand the importance of failure for learning? So maybe I'll just give my take on that, Sam. Maybe you can chip in after mine.
Yep.
I think I'm based in Asia, and one thing I noticed about the culture in Asia, that there is a different culture here. Now that might be changing through globalization. However, it's quite, culture takes time. And I've learned through teaching in 3 schools in Hong Kong that amongst the local community and Asian culture in general, failure is not seen as a good thing. So how do we model that? I mean, the one way I like to share my own experiences. Like when I always find that my ears listen in closer when I hear people sharing their own stories. So if I talk about my own difficulties in learning subjects or learning anything, I think, and then saying how I had a positive outcome of that. In fact, by learning, I learned what not to do next time, and I tried a different strategy or whatever. I think that can inspire people. So when I teach business and economics, I'm quite open and saying, when I was studying this, I struggled with this, and this is what I did, and that's what helped me. And maybe you can try that out and see how it works for you and report back. So I think that's my strategy, is just being open, being honest, being vulnerable in a way, so to speak, and making it okay that failure is fine. And I think you can kind of model and train that, and then students then feel a bit more relaxed and comfortable about it. But some students are more difficult to shift than others. That's just my experience in business and economics. I teach the older ones, and sometimes they're quite, how can I say, they've been like that for a long time, so it might take a bit more effort. What's your experience of that, Sam?
Yeah, I think in reference to that question, it's always very difficult with parents in various contexts, really. I think it really stems from them understanding your environment and the environment you create. So in my classroom, I share with parents every year, at the beginning of every year, 5 non-negotiables. And my non-negotiables are all around growth. So you've always got then a reference point to draw back on. So I'm a primary school, I'm in year 4 currently. And at the beginning of every year, we develop a non-negotiables, and it's all around always my best, always resilient, always respectful. And it's a matter of whatever that might mean to you, whatever it's important to you, sharing that with parents. And then you can reference it whenever parents might question or challenge certain things you do. You've always got that as something to hold on to and reference. Kate, you've got your hand up there. Is there something you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about how labeling children as gifted and talented is actually a really complex concept when we think about growth mindset, because it's a very fixed thing. When you tell a student that they're gifted or that they're really good at something, what you're essentially telling them is that it's kind of them and it's their identity to be really good at something. So when we're thinking about limitless learning, I think it can be just as damaging for high achievers to too often hear their identity linked to achievement, because what happens is the first time they find things difficult, they don't have any strategies for dealing with it and they feel like they've failed. which was my experience at university, because I was a super good girl at school and went through the whole of school being really obedient and trying really hard, and then did the subjects I was good at. And then when I got to university, all of a sudden I couldn't do it anymore, and realized that up until that point, I'd had a really fixed mindset. I saw myself as somebody who was good at school. And then when I all of a sudden wasn't good at school, it took me a whole year and a half to be able to work out what I should do at that point. And so the whole first year of university was totaled for me, because I didn't know really how to cope with challenge, because up until that point, just kind of doing what the teacher told me was enough, and I'd never had to work through struggle. So it's really interesting how that it's a difficult thing for our low achieving students, but even our students who are successful in school because they've learned how to manage at school, when they hit real difficulty, they will find that they haven't necessarily developed the growth mindset they're going to need to carry them through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point. Andrew, you put there, state of art and design and curriculum encourages process-based learning and embrace failure. Any art and design teachers here, or anyone who's got that background? I don't have personal background myself, but I guess with that, you're probably looking at embracing in kind of an inquiry approach, and around skills to do with resilience and imperfection, I guess, that with sort of languages you use around art and design. Unfortunately, I don't have a huge amount of background in that, but I was thinking, talking about process-based learning, embracing failure. Yeah, there's lots out there in terms of an artist, a butterfly. I can't remember who did the butterfly, but a child did a butterfly a day, and it over time and designed this butterfly, and the teacher went back and gave 1 point to look at, go and redesign the butterfly, and then over time there was huge difference in this butterfly that had been designed. So yeah, I think it's around resilience and very finite kind of learning points. Anyone have
Austin's butterfly? I'm popping it in the chat.
That was it. Yeah, Austin's butterfly. Thank you.
So Sam, there's a question here from Christina. Christina says, how do grades and marks play into this idea of fixed growth mindset? Yeah, if you read the book, Limitless Learning, there's loads of nuggets in that book about studies where teachers have played and experimented with feedback. So yeah, grades can actually give you the label of I'm performing well, I'm performing not so well. So it can be detrimental in a way. So there is, I remember from reading the book, there was an excellent example of a teacher who had a great feedback card, and the feedback card was kind of acknowledging what the student had done well and giving them ideas about how to improve in the future. But I don't remember seeing any grades here, because automatically students just filter all the other stuff out. They see the grade and then they immediately make a self-judgment on how well they performed. However, we are in a culture of grades. Mm. So it's kind of getting the balance right and experimenting what we're. So for example, when I mark students' work, I always write comments. And I think I sense the students enjoy the comments more than the mark, because it's interesting. They want to get acknowledgement of what they did well. And so I always kind of just do what you did well, what can you do better next time? I think it's a very simple strategy, but I use grades as well, because they need to know where they're at. So I kind of work with the balance with that. I'm not sure what you do, Sam, in primary school.
Yeah, it's a really tricky balance, Christina. You're right. I think, depending on your context, standardized assessments is quite a major part of a learning experience. But what I find when you're referring to younger learners particularly, it's about talking about the journey. I know it's a bit of a cliche that people might hear before, and seeing it as a kind of experience and always developmental, and really taking the pressure off, particularly for the younger learners, until the sort of external assessments. It's really taking them up to that point and protecting them from the pressures of assessment until it's really needed. But you're right, because of the context we live in, it and universities and the rest, we are accountable to assessment. So there is a difficult approach. I get a language change that you would need to bring into your classroom to take off the pressure for children and see it as more of a growth journey.
Can I just add one more thing, Sam? I think earlier Tom said the question about how do you encourage parents to understand the importance of failure for learning. I did what I always do. I didn't answer the question directly. One of my areas for improvement, the way I kind of, the language I use so I don't kind of make myself feel bad about that, is I often don't read the question carefully enough. So I think with parents, I don't often get parents saying that to me. But you know, if you were to look throughout history, all successful people, they've all failed over and over and over again. So stories and case studies are always good to kind of show that failure is actually quite good if you use it in the right way. But I've never had a parent ask me that. You know, it'd probably be easier to work with the students so the students themselves can inspire the parents, but failure is okay.
Michaela, you've also put in here about further reading recommendations aside from Dweck. Yeah, I've got a bit of a bibliography that we can share and get that circulated. That's fine. You also say here the biggest challenge is encouraging growth and incorporating growth mindset. It comes from the teacher there. So you've got to model the behaviors. And if you're not modeling the behaviors, then you haven't got a chance really with your group. So I'd say that's the biggest challenge. And being consistent in your approach and being aware that actually the first time you try developing a growth culture, it won't necessarily work, but that's part of your growth and your limitless approach. So being very clear on what you want, what sort of language you want in your classroom, and model, really. So it all comes from us initially.
Can I just say that this type of learning really does work. I've taught in many schools in my I've over 21 years of experience, and I've taught in many schools. And for the last 8 years or so, I've been teaching with this in this way. In one of my previous schools, I've worked at a very deprived school, and the children really struggled, had vast ability ranges in my classes. But teaching them about struggle and teaching them about growth mindset and the brain and how it works made a huge difference to their outlook and to their whole, wanting to persevere, and that resilience has really, really came to light during that time. And now I teach in a small independent school, and it's the same effect. Even with the girls that I teach now, they just love to learn about the brain. They love to learn about the way that they learn. And I've got year 2, and we're teaching them. I teach them words like metacognition, and it's brilliant because they use it as well in their language when they're explaining things, and they love it. And it just really shows the power of teaching in this way. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, Matthew and Sam, for your webinar today.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks.